Okay, so at this point in the course, you've covered modeling, you've covered constraints, you've covered hypernerves, you've covered splines, we've covered particles, we've covered some rendering, we've done some animation, we've done all kinds of things. So let's try and put all of that together into a small little scene. So the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to build a fire hydrant and put it on some glass. We're going to put on some grass, put an environment and a sky in. Okay, so we're going to build something like this. Not exactly this one, but the big thing we're going to point out here is just a bit of a workflow issue and how to get objects to look like this. Two round objects connected together. So let's do that first. We're going to start out with a cylinder. Now, typically, modeling something like this, I would actually use a regular primitive like this, a regular disk. I'd make it editable. I would then select all of these polygons here. And actually don't even have to. I can just right click and choose bevel or extrude. Maybe do an extrude inner and pull that in a little. And then right click and then extrude up and start building out from there. Okay. In order to close the bottom, and I just wanted to show you this, we're going to rebuild this a little bit differently in a minute. But I'll press U and then L for my loop select in edge mode. I got that loop. I can right click and bevel that, or if I wanted, just even move it down. Okay. And what's cool about doing this is that it just gives me this extra little space at the bottom. Okay. So it's very, very flexible as far as modeling some simple objects and really continuing to build up from there. And of course, we would just go back to polygon mode and maybe with a direct selection, go like this and choose these in the center. Then we'd right click, extrude, and just start pulling that up. And that would be our fire hydrant from there, and we'd modify it. And that's all well and good, but there's a reason I actually want to do this a little bit differently. Because we can do it right from the start. And as you can see here, what I'm doing is, as I'm pulling this up, I'm actually increasing the subdivisions. Okay. And what's neat about that is that I can control those subdivisions in specific areas. That's great, but I'd rather have just a whole mesh that way to begin with rather than trying to cut it up and add them as I build. Okay, so that's just one way to model it. Let's close all that. In this case, we are actually just going to start out with the cylinder already made. But before we make it a full editable polygon, okay, and I'm just using a default cylinder there, in our attributes manager for the cylinder, we can put all the height and everything on it that we want. And I'm going to put a lot on here because we're going to do something pretty intricate. So we want a good amount of segments on there. Okay. So I don't want this to be just a very simple object. I actually want it to be, and make these very quad. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. So we need a lot of detail in there. It's just a lot easier to set it up this way to begin with. Okay, so we're going to make that an editable object. Cylinder, and we'll call this hydrant. And then we're going to Command C, Command V, copy and paste. We're going to take that copy, move it over, choose scale, and I'm going to scale it down like that. If you take a look at it, you can see it's just about that size. Maybe about there. Okay, we're going to take our rotate tool. I'm going to rotate it on the bank like that. And if you want specifically, you can just punch in 90 or negative 90, it doesn't matter. Then I'm going to move it in and I'm going to move it up. And this is going to be either side of our hydrant. Okay, and I can actually pull it in as far as I need. From there, I'm going to copy and paste again, and then I'm going to actually put that copy on the other side. Now, if I didn't want to do that, perhaps I want this to be identical on the other side, not want to worry about making it visually accurate. I want to make it specifically accurate, and I don't have to worry about looking at my measurements here. Let's just use the symmetry tool. So with that hydrant selected, that little second one, we'll come under here to Tools, Objects, Symmetry. Okay, and just like anything else, we'll take that hydrant and we'll drop it in there, and now we have a symmetrical object. And what that means is whatever I do here happens on the other side, because that symmetry object this guy is working. And of course the mirror plane is the default ZY. You can change that if you want, plus a tolerance and weld points and so on if you're going to mirror character over or something like that. Okay, so now I've got the hydrant and I've got those guys. Well, that's fine, but if you do a render on this, well, it's okay, you know. We want that to be really smooth and molded together. We don't want that to be that hard edge. So there's a way you can do this, and the reason I put so much detail into these is because we're going to need it. And it still might need a little bit more, but I'm going to take the Boolean object right here and add that, and I'm going to put my, what should we call these things? All you firemen out there, you can tell me what those are called. But I'm going to call them water spouts. And here's the hydrant. We're going to take both of those and drop them into the Boolean. Okay. Now, if you take a look at this, like we've done with the bowling ball, of course, one object by default is cutting out the other object. You know, and that's fine. And if we reverse order here, this is typically, this is typically what a Boolean does, right? Okay, looks good, nice and clean, and that's partly because we have all that good geometry to work with. However, there's a lot more control in this Boolean than meets the eye. So what we're going to do is come around here and come down here to the object properties for the Boolean. Again, that's selected, object properties in the attributes manager. The Boolean type, instead of subtracting A to B, hydrant from water spout, and vice versa, we're going to union. Well, big deal. That's kind of where I was at in the beginning. However, we're going to make it a single object, and we're going to hide the new edges. So all those little extra edges that were added, we're going to hide those. And if you do a quick render, okay, you can see it actually starts to blend those together. Now, it's not very clean, but there's a few things in here we can do to clean it up. And one of them is the optimized points. And if you just kind of mouse in here and just start increasing this, and we'll give this a second to catch up. Again, it's a lot of data to work with, so it's actually adjusting all of those. Okay, that's one thing. The next, of course, how do you spell hydrant? I think I like that. Next thing we do is hold the Alt Option key and add a hyperNURBS. And that will add a hyperNURBS to that hydrant and add and subdivide even more. And now we've got that nice edge. And once we put our anti-aliasing on, we'll have a much better area. We can also add a little more subdivision, and we can work now with these edges a little bit too. But you got to be careful on your render that you don't overdo that. So it takes up too much render time. And I'm actually really good with this. I like that a lot because if you take a look at most hydrants, they kind of look like that. That's why I think this feature works really well for what we're trying to do, because it's got sort of a welded look. The polygons aren't pinching up into the unit at all. They're not streaking at all. And by increasing the optimized points value, we get that nice kind of look we're wanting. The difference is because we have tighter geometry here and larger geometry here, it's trying to do its best to make up for that. So certainly if you balance the amount of geometry in each and make them as clean as possible, matching up as much as possible, you're going to have a much cleaner edge. However, I'm pretty happy with this edge because, again, it looks like a little bit of a welded edge, and it's perfect for what we're trying to do. Now, the last thing to know about this, which is really cool, is that these are live objects, and you can actually, don't forget that symmetry is still working. You can actually move these in real time, and it'll adjust that edge. Now, mine's working pretty slow because there's so much being calculated, which is okay. Let me turn this off for a minute. And what's kind of neat is that I can pull these right out to the edge. And again, if your math is right on both cylinders, the large and the small, and that geometry lines up as much as you possibly can, you're going to have a much cleaner object. Okay, but Bottom line is, those things are molded and welded right in there. We'll put our hypernerbs back on. And so even if you wanted to offset these a little bit, you could do it, and it looks like it's actually part of the model. Okay, so it's great for pipes and machinery and things like that. So I'm just going to undo a couple of times and be patient, so let this update. There we go. I think I got to do one more undo. Yeah. One more. Come on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to save this as Hydrant. Okay, and that's how we're going to build those. We're going to leave it just like that. Now I'm going to turn off the NURBS for right now, so that way we can work a little bit faster. And then in the next video, now we're going to go back and build out the base and pull up the top and all the other things.